The rotation. Shona, who I would easily characterize as my closest friend in the world, asked me, "You know she's cheating on you." Her piercing blue eyes were fixed on my face, offering me no clear way out of her assertion. I didn't know where to look in the moments that followed her blatantly blurting out anything to make my day worse. At her apartment, we were seated on the back deck. I sat there not really knowing how to answer or what to say. Although it wasn't completely unexpected, the question she asked me a few moments ago threw me off guard. I had been spending a quiet afternoon until she inquired. However, the inquiry that was written in her gaze also concealed a certain kind of anguish on her stunning face, which only the two of us could comprehend, at having to make those statements. I avoided her stare for a few moments before turning to face Shona and holding her gaze for a short while wishing the last 30 seconds could be undone. I was aware that Shona wouldn't have accepted the challenge unless she had a valid cause. I looked up at the chilly gray winter sky, but I could feel the muscles in my shoulders tensing. It was the coldest time of year for those of us who are local to this part of Australia's Byron Bay coast. We sat on her back patio in the late afternoon, hot chocolate in hand, warm sweaters on, a cool wind coming in off the beach. I stared at the skies, trying not to look at her, and the moment dragged on forever. Given the way the clouds were moving, I predicted that we would probably get a shower or two and possibly some heavy rain in the coming hours. With a sigh, I took up my half-empty hot chocolate mug and watched the cloud patterns shift, occasionally revealing a peek of the blue sky beyond before they vanished. I inhaled deeply, feeling as though the bright sky and my enjoyment were suddenly inaccessible. I tried to ignore Shona's unsettling statements, but even thinking about the weather could not take my mind off of them. I looked away from the clouds, still clutching the warm, sweet mug in my hands, and toward my 8-year-old daughter Maddie, who was happily pushing her half-brother, Greg, on the swing in Shona's garden. The exchange lasted for what seemed like a few minutes. Neither of us had spoken again, and I knew Shona was waiting for me to finish thinking. She was aware that I had been suspecting something was off for some time. Her justification and caustic remarks made me question about my wife. I've been gloomy and moody to everyone for the past several months due to time abroad, less making love, and more than a few hurtful comments that forced me to sleep in the spare bedroom a few times. However, everyone was aware that I was a lover, not a warrior, and would do everything in my power to avoid conflict. Not that I was a doormat for everyone all the time. When necessary, I would defend my rights and the rights of everyone around me, but when it came to personal issues, I preferred to put things off and hope they went away rather than confronting them head-on if I could avoid it. As I watched Maddie and Greg play, I let out a deep breath once more, feeling feelings that I had been suppressing for months rise to the surface of my chest. I forcefully swallowed as a knot of stress that had been bothering me for some time suddenly manifested as an ache. I turned to face Shona once more and saw the painful expression on her face. She wouldn't have wanted to start anything, I know that, but at the same time, she would have been the first person in the world to support me. I couldn't think of anything to say as I allowed my eyes to return to her, and while I was watching, Shona gingerly took an envelope from her bag next to her. It was one of those enormous bags that mothers everywhere carry with them to ensure they have everything their children need. "I'm sorry, hon, I can't think of a kinder way to say it, but Bridget is cheating on you," she said to me. For a minute, Shona held the envelope. It appeared thick and was size A3. She gave me another look that was both pitying and hurting, yet she sighed and stuck to her plan. With deliberate slowness, she placed the envelope on the table in front of her and rested her left hand on it. "It's all here. I have been debating this in my mind all afternoon, but you need to know what is going on. Do you want me to give it to you now or later?" Her pain was visible again behind her eyes. She had to see the dejection on my face because she was not enjoying this at all. What was hurting her was that she knew me better than anyone because she had been my closest friend for the majority of my life, save for a few months. Timothy Other is my name. Everyone calls me Tim, of course. Up until just now, I fooled myself into believing that I was blissfully married to Bridget. But glancing at the envelope Shona had just produced, I realized it held the truth, that things weren't all that joyful and healthy in my marriage. As I looked back on the last year, the last 6 months, let's call it that, I'd always had my doubts about Bridget's faithfulness, but there was nothing overt I could point to. I let out a loud sigh as I glanced at the envelope that Shona was holding. Regretfully, I had experienced the awful situation of having an unfaithful spouse previously. Once more, we sat silently as I gazed at the stack of unfavorable information beneath Shona's palm. The expression on Shona's face told me everything in the envelope would hurt, even though I didn't want it to be true. "How are you doing, Shona?" I said, a little shaky in voice as I fingered the cup that held roughly a third of a rapidly cooling hot chocolate. She said, "Rick," very quickly. Shona's husband, Rick, was a successful family lawyer with several connections in the Byron Bay and northern New South Wales region, as well as in Queensland. I had a strange relationship with Rick. Shona was our love, and we would do everything for her. In spite of our past, or perhaps more so because of Shona's and my own, Rick had grown to be a close friend as well. We looked at the envelope for a little longer. If the information in the package that Shona had contained what I anticipated it would, then Rick was a better friend than I had realized, and Bridget and I were done. That or, maybe, finally taking the piss out of me for being so amiable with his wife. I glanced at the envelope under Shona's palm for a few more seconds, then a feeling of nausea passed through me. I was thinking, I don't believe I can handle this again. You won't be by yourself, Tim, Shona assured Tim. She always seemed to be able to tell how I was feeling. However, it was reciprocal, and I could tell that she was holding back when she said, this time. Despite everything we had gone through together, we were still only 25 years old. It was always going to hurt to go through a second divorce before I was 30. She let me time to digest what was happening, so there were long pauses in our discourse. We remained silent for the third time until Maddie emerged with Greg, who was 1 year old. Her nose wrinkled as she said, Mom, I think Greg needs a nappy change. He stinks. A whiff indicated that the child was actually wearing an extremely ripe diaper. At the time, my 18-year-old daughter was in the habit of telling stories about everything she did. Without a word, Shona got up and took her suitcase, removing Greg from Maddie's arms. She glanced at me for a few seconds, then picked up the envelope again and nodded to Maddie before meeting my gaze once again. In response, I nodded. There was nothing for Maddie to see in there. In the following few seconds, Maddie scooted into my lap, gave me a hug, and then gave me an air kiss while Shona brought her kid in for a change of nappies. Maddie said, Are you okay, Dad? You don't look right. What were you and Mom just talking about? She asked, judging by the expression on my face, which I was unable to conceal. You're not fighting again like when I was little, are you? My daughter was pale at the prospect. Her mom and I haven't been a couple for as long as she could remember, but we've always been best friends in her eyes. However, a few years prior, she inquired as to why we weren't together, given how much we claimed to love one another. Maddie had grown to love the stories that Shona and I told her, but she was clearly concerned by recent rumors that said we had been fighting. You see, I used to be married to Shona. Within a week of our third-year school reunion, we had become close friends. When the hormones started to kick in, friendships turned into dating, and before we knew what was in store, we were pregnant as teenagers. Although horrified, our parents encouraged us. We got married shortly after Maddie was born because, at the time, we were young and felt it was the proper decision. As it happened, we never ought to have. Yes, Shona and I were the best of friends, but our companionship wasn't meant to be married. I'll admit that after having Maddie and being married, we appeared to be a young couple in love, but the love was real and our relationship was strong. However, a long list of unimportant things added up and ultimately broke us. We simply couldn't be married to one another, despite our best efforts. The fact that I am a gamer and software programmer was one of the reasons that broke us. I was 16 when I launched my first business, married at 18, had a child, and worked enormous 80 to 90-hour work weeks over that entire period. I tried to give Shona and Maddie as much time as I could, but it was never enough for her. It was the tiny things, like I mentioned. Until they reach their 20s or even 30s, most people do not experience the burden of having children and working. Even though we were only 18, Shona and I already had. Although they appeared to be supportive, none of our parents believed we would succeed and forced us to sign prenuptial agreements before we were married. Mine because my parents were providing me with startup capital, and Shona's because they didn't want their daughter involved in my business in the event that it failed. The company performed rather well. It was successful. However, I started a new company within 2 years and merged the previous one with it to form Other Gaming. Even though I'm in my mid-20s, I oversee 50 employees across 3 nations. Programmers, testers, marketers, and numerous administrative staff members are included in this. Through a variety of primarily free games with inbuilt microtransactions, Other Gaming generates over $180 million in income annually. If you wish to advance in the game faster than anybody else, you can purchase items via microtransactions. You can purchase more perks, time, or resources. Although our earnings are not as high as those of some gaming companies, they are nonetheless respectable, and we have not yet had a financial quarter that our investors find unsatisfactory. In any case, during those early years, Shona and I cherished our child, were best friends, and experienced incredible bonding. However, in the end, the best way I can sum it up is that we simply weren't soulmates in love. As I previously stated, the small things you overlook when you are genuinely in love with your spouse, were what broke us. It drives you crazy if you're not. There was always going to be a path that led to our marriage being destroyed. I wasn't there as often as I should have been since I was preoccupied with the business, which made Shona contribute to our downfall considerably faster. Perhaps, though, our friendship was also spared by the destruction's rapid pace. We were fighting all the time over Maddie, the housework, and my time at work, and it was getting worse. Regarding work, I once had an after-hours meeting with a few of my investors and neglected to inform Shona. Shona was mad at me when I arrived home that day because she hadn't told me she wanted me to attend a meeting at Maddie's daycare. I couldn't figure out why. After nearly 30 minutes of yelling at each other, Shona stormed out of the house, instructing me to make dinner on my own and yelling at me to be a responsible parent and look after our daughter. She then went on to phone a few of her girlfriends, got really drunk, and woke up the following morning in the bed of a stranger who had picked her up from the pub. To Shona's credit, despite her tears and regret, she never sought to hide what she did from me or spoke lies. The next day, she returned home, distraught and apologetic. But when she told me what she did as a young man, my best friend and wife emasculated me, and my whole world fell apart. I verbally attacked her, calling her a nasty lady, without giving it any thought. After a brief moment of recoil, Shona shot back, calling me a deadbeat parent and miserable nerd who never supported her or our baby. Her voice was brimming with hate. She knew it was a mistake the instant the obscenities from her mouth. We both knew that I didn't mean what I said when I walked out and slept with someone else, but her reaction and the hint of malice she gave off was like an arrow straight to the heart. She understood that, in spite of everything, I had been her best friend for as long as either of us could remember. She attempted to say, fists clenched around her mouth in fear, "Tim, I gave her a somber glance, raised my hand, and then turned to leave. I moved into the spare bedroom right away. Our screaming matches could probably be heard across the neighborhood throughout the next few months. I was obviously devastated, so I used the prenup to justify my adultery and filed for divorce. When Shona was served at home while I was at work, she didn't follow the standard counseling path. She would become irate and yell at me, calling me a wimp and pathetic in bed and the worst mistake of her life anytime we were in a room for longer than 30 seconds before breaking down in tears. Over the course of the next few weeks, she would alternate between being contrite and pleading for forgiveness. We only really got along when Maddie was present, which wasn't very often. Ultimately, our parents' intervention, which was almost like them saying, "We told you so," was what saved us. We returned to ourselves when they declared a truce. One evening, when I arrived home, all four of them were in the living room, with Shona sobbing and upset as our mothers conversed quietly with her. We ended up with 6 of us intervening after both of my fathers pulled me away and gave me a little what for, even though they knew I was the one who was upset. They put on a lot of pressure and made us feel bad. They tormented us, one by one, for 3 hours. Later, when they left us alone to talk, for 15 minutes, neither Shona nor I said anything. But as soon as we began talking, the pain and suffering vanished. We spoke without yelling at one another for the first time, despite the fact that she had cheated on me, which had devastated us both. When she told me she wouldn't have done it if she hadn't been intoxicated and furious, I decided to believe her. "I'm really sorry, Tim," Shona said as she wiped tears from her eyes. "I never meant to hurt you like this. I should never have left that night, never have. Never had done what I did," she murmured after inhalation. "I disrespected you badly, and I was stupid and even worse when I took my anger at myself out on you for the cheating I did." I gave a sorrowful smile. "And I am sorry, it hurt Shona, it still does. You're my closest friend, I should have forgiven you." With regret, Shona reached up and caressed my cheek. "Thank you, Tim, but where does this leave us?" she inquired. Over the next few hours, we continued our conversation. We decided that we could no longer be married if we were to be friends and restore our mutual trust. She sobbed in my arms for the first time in months, despite the fact that we never shared a bed or made love again. We spent a great deal of time together over the next 3 days. We both felt that co-parenting as friends was a better option than husband and wife. Over the next 18 months, the divorce proceeded, and gradually Shona and I were once again best friends. After we made the decision to let go of the resentment, we discovered that, despite our marriage ashes, we were still as close as we had been before, if not closer, gradually coming to trust and confide in one another as we had done when we first started dating. We gave each other embraces and even the odd chaste kiss, but after our divorce, our passionate love vanished. Yes, I was depressed. I was still completely devoted to Shona. However, if we end up married and unable to trust one another, I would much rather have her as a friend and in my life. A week after Maddie turned 4, and just less than a year after the divorce, Bridget and I began dating. We met through Bridget's job with Shona at the time. When it became clear that Shona and I were done, Bridget had been teasing us about a date for months. She approached me on her own when I didn't ask her out. I asked Shona if dating Bridget was okay if I did so. I could see that dating was hurting her, but she reluctantly gave me her blessing. Following our initial dates, I would frequently come home to find Shona and Maddie at my door, and I would always tell her about Bridget and I, even though tears were gathering in the corner of her eyes. She remained a real friend and never publicly passed judgment on me during those early days. My first date with Bridget lasted only 3 months before she took me to bed and completely changed my life. I had only ever made tender, delicate love up until that point. In bed, Shona and I had always made an effort to support one another, but Bridget showed me what a good time looked like in bed. We started dating, and after about 6 months, the intense bonding gradually subsided into more intimate, lengthier encounters. That's when she told me she wasn't just wanting me, she was falling in love. Bridget told me the truth, stating that she was ending a long-term relationship that she described as intense but unhealthy, at the same time as Shona and I were divorcing. After our brief encounters when Shona and I were out together, Bridget saw me as a nice and caring person who would take care of her instead of her abusive and manipulative ex-boyfriend. Bridget has a short yet well-built build. She spent hours at the gym, which paid off since she had toned but huge calves and a stomach that almost had a six-pack. I learned so many new postures from her. After it was resolved, Bridget moved in with me, and things seemed to improve even more. She was a pleasure to spend time with, constantly joking about and inquiring about my day. She enjoyed going out, but she also accepted my requests to remain home and cuddle. After a year or so of cohabitation, Bridget began making marriage-related insinuations. After a short while, I took the hint this time and made a proposal. We got married 8 months later. The timing would have been earlier, but my legal team demanded protection. She attempted to persuade me to renounce the prenup, which was a requirement for our marriage, and the chairman of my board flew in from Sydney to meet with Bridget and me and explain why the prenup would happen or our marriage wouldn't. After several furious talks, we came dangerously close to breaking up over it, but in the end, my board chair left, and she signed the paperwork. With several of my new games becoming well-known worldwide, other gaming was gaining popularity, so my corporate lawyers and board achieved what they want. Shona met Rick as Bridget and I were getting ready for the wedding, and despite my desire to despise him, I was unable to. Rick, who was a few years older than both Shona and me, was amiable. He complimented her in a manner that I could never have, and I saw this when I saw them together. It was almost entirely different from when Bridget and I first started dating. Rick and Shona were cautious and needed some time to get close. I started out on lust with Bridget. After Shona made me aware of this, we had a few lengthy conversations in which we decided to discuss our partner-related envy in order to ensure that we never again avoided one another's company. Everyone knew not to interfere with Shona and my friendship while Bridget, Rick, and Shona developed as a pair. For instance, there were a few instances in the early days of Rick and Shona when we nearly got into an argument. That's not true, though. He did hit me in the mouth once, after I dropped Maddie off, when he saw Shona hugging me. By this point, they were engaged, Bridget and I were married, and Shona urged him to stop being envious because Maddie's father and I were already married. He could pack his crap if he couldn't handle that. 6 months later, I was a groomsman at their wedding. Overall, the way our relationships functioned was a little strange. It was always known that Shona and I were in each other's pockets, and things would never be different with Maddie involved. Rick and I became good friends and confidants once he got over that and realized I wasn't a threat to their relationship. With Shona's encouragement, the two of us ended up spending a good deal of time on the golf course, and Rick realized that I loved his wife, but not in that manner. Bridget and Shona got along well and became friends at the same time. They were never really best friends, although they did occasionally get together while Rick and I went on walks with Maddie or played golf. Returning to the present, I bent down and gave my overbearing daughter a quick kiss on the cheek while she took a chocolate chip from a muffin that I wasn't really eating that was sitting in front of me. I told Maddie, "No, sweetie," attempting to figure out how to approach her about her father's wife without mentioning her mother's infidelity. I finally said, struggling to find the appropriate words, "Mummy and I are not fighting. She's just talking to me about something I think is going to be difficult." With defiance, Maddie remarked, "It's Bridget, isn't it?" I fixed my gaze on her. Like a preteen girl who believes she knows everything there is to know about the universe, she snorted. After glancing at my face, she said, "I thought so." Maddie, with a scowl, "You need to respect Bridget. I get she's not your mom, but you like Rick, and he's not your dad," I stated to my daughter. She snorted once more, riffling through the muffin that I was plainly not interested in. "Yeah, but Rick respects you and Mom's relationship, and he adores Mom. Bridget doesn't like Mom or me and doesn't respect you." I sat there a bit surprised. I simply can't figure out how I missed it. I had been married to Bridget for over 3 years, but we had been together for 4. Many things had suddenly become clear to me, especially in light of my daughter's remarks, who was 8 years old, and what I knew was contained in the envelope that Shona was about to show me. I was tolerant of small things that Bridget did for me, Shona, and Maddie. Upon taking a quick, analytical look at everything, I could see the small instances of disrespect and how I had overlooked them following the breakdown of my marriage to Shona. I was probably more passive and forgiving than I should have been, and I think Bridget sensed that I wanted things to work. For several minutes, we sat in silence while Maddie kept eating my muffin. Eventually, Shona returned with Greg wearing a clean diaper. After glancing at me, Shona requested Maddie to take Greg outside to play, but we continued our conversation. Maddie began to object, but Shona silenced her with her motherly voice. Never dispute with the motherly voice. Our daughter walked back into the backyard with Greg, and we both just gazed after her. As we watched Maddie and her brother go, Shona remarked, "She's almost got it figured out, Tim. She's almost too smart and sees things that she shouldn't at her age." It was my time to snort as we watched the half-siblings make themselves comfortable in a sandpit, with Maddie beginning to dig a hole into which Greg found amusement in pushing sand back. "She must get that from you. I miss all of it, don't I?" I replied with sadness. I turned to face the woman I had spent so much time loving, that I still adored today. I felt hopeless in a lot of ways, even though I hadn't yet seen what was inside the envelope. Shortly afterward, Shona appeared on the chair next to me, unexpectedly encircling me with her arms and providing comfort as we both shed a few tears. I realized that Bridget had not truly loved me for a while now, if I was being honest with myself. I was aware that there were far too many unaccounted for items. I went to remove the envelope out of Shona's bag as soon as I noticed it protruding. Then I released myself from her embrace and sat back next to her. Shona leaned over and placed a hand on my as I opened the letter. "Tim," she said, drawing my attention to her. "Nothing in there is going to make you feel anything but pain." "All right," I nodded. She had clearly already peered inside. After swallowing, I had no choice but to open the package and take out what appeared to be 2 documents in a USB drive. The first document included transcripts of conversations that were identified as having taken place on the USB drive in addition to a combined report on the hours, dates, and locations at which Bridget had been followed. There was no question that the information I was fast reading was accurate thanks to a mix of audio and video captures on the drive. If the first paper, as I leafed through its pages, crushed my heart over Bridget's infidelity, the second one shot my heart like a clay target, hitting it precisely with a 12 gauge. In the second set of documents, Bridget was shown in picture after picture with a different man, her former boyfriend Brad. It began calmly like they were sipping coffee and the pictures turned into a kiss and eventually worse things. I felt emotionless as I exhaled bitterly and put the documents and the USB key back in the package, but I knew that I would be hit hard by it later. I said, "Why?" as I felt something within of me crumble. Shona remained silent. I believe she felt some of the pain in my inquiry. She uttered Tim. Before pausing, I looked at my first betrayer, my ex-wife, my oldest friend, and my daughter's mother. With a tense chest, I questioned, "What's wrong with me?" Shona was surprised by my inquiry. "I mean, am I just so pathetic the women I love have to cheat on me?" I felt regret for the remarks as soon as I said them. Shona answered right away. I just sat there feeling betrayed as she began to cry as soon as she planted a kiss on my cheek and immediately wrapped her arms around my neck. She turned to face me a moment later, and I stopped her. "Tim, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have," she said. "No, it's me, Shona," I sadly answered. "I shouldn't have said that. It's unfair, and I'm sorry I compared this to us back then. Forgive me," I replied. With a faint smile, she withdrew and planted a kiss on my forehead. Of course, another voice said, well, what have we here?" "That seemed really comfortable," the voice remarked. Rick turned to face the visitor and we saw him smiling while attempting a serious expression but failing miserably. His once teasing smile turned to a mournful one as he noticed the envelope in my hands. "Oh," he remarked without attempting to separate Shona and me. Rather, he approached me, took the chair across from me, put his hand on my shoulder, and gave me a squeeze. "I'm sorry, mate, I kind of took this one on myself. Shona and Maddie had both said things that made me wonder, so I put some wheels in motion a couple of months ago. The pie is one I have used a few times. I just got the report yesterday," he added with a serious expression on his expression. I asked Rick, "Have you looked at it yet?" He shook his head. "No, not a real look. I just had a peek from the pie when we brought it in," his spouse said. "But I am assuming from both your reactions that both of you have." Both of us gave a nod. Rick sighed and returned to his chair. Rick said, "So, what's next?" Sighing, I said, "Divorce." Without saying anything, the three of us turned to face the sandpit. Now little Greg was in the hole that Maddie had dug, and while Greg smiled, my daughter was filling it in. She would occasionally glance in our direction before returning her focus to Greg because she realized it was time for grown-up conversation. The three of us grinned, even though the subject was serious. "Is it appropriate for you two?" Shona trailed off, asking Rick. "Baby." As he was finished the question, he said, "Represent Tim." Shona gave a nod. Rick questioned me, quite seriously and in legal mode. "Yeah, I can do that. Tim, would you be all right with that?" I gave Rick the envelope and nodded, saying, "Yes, you'll need this. That's your copy. I assumed it would be your choice and have one on my desk in the office," he said, pushing it back. "Prenup?" he inquired. I quickly found the paper on my phone and picked it up from the table. I then emailed my new family lawyer the prenuptial agreement that Bridget and I had signed. I chuckled. I was forwarding the details to my ex-wife's husband. Shona gave me a strange look. "What's that for?" I added, "My divorce lawyer who is going to eviscerate my cheating wife," while Rick grinned like a huge white shark about to chow down. "Is married to my ex-wife, who I technically divorced for cheating on me and enforcing a prenuptial agreement," I stated, putting quotation marks around it. For a brief while, nobody spoke, and I started to question whether I had stepped too far into my own mouth. However, Shona laughed and hugged me a moment later. Rick gave me a backslap. Rick mockingly remarked, "At least you still have a sense of humor." We talked about my future moves for the next 30 minutes. Bridget is spending the week with her mother up on the Gold Coast. She will be gone for at least another 5 nights, I stated during our planning session. The glances Rick shot me and Shona shot back at her husband said more than words could have ever written. Most likely, Bridget wasn't going to see her mom. "It's okay," I muttered. The fact that my wife was not with her mother added a bit more hurt to the mix, like icing on a crap sandwich. Well, I suppose I deserve that, but it will give me some time to get things moving. After a few minutes of conversation, just as the sun was setting, Maddie led Greg back to the table. After my daughter showered me with hugs and kisses, I drove home in my 2016 Mach 1 Mustang, which was painted in Arctic white. The ride took around 30 minutes. I bought my first new car, a Mustang, as a prize for reaching $5 million in sales. The board set me a budget and was shocked to see that I bought a Mustang for less than half of it. As I pulled into the garage after arriving home, the large security gates closed on the driveway. The home was rented to me as an executive benefit by a division of Other Gaming. It was a means to get a big, contemporary house at the time, a house Bridget had desired. All I wanted was a comfy place to sleep and a decent study for my computer equipment. Nevertheless, the home was pleasant, featuring 5 bedrooms, 6 bathrooms, and a veranda with distant views of the ocean. Maddie had her own bedroom furnished to the tastes of an 8-year-old, me using one of the bedrooms as my computer and game area, and of course, Bridget and I had the spacious master bedroom with a distant view of the ocean. Even though we had only been in the house for 6 months, as a young married couple we had christened pretty much every room in the house and hosted a few parties during that time. Had she ever brought Brad here, I thought. That thought sickened me. I entered the kitchen and placed the envelope containing Bridget and Brad's details on the kitchen bench along with my suitcase. I went straight to the cupboard and came back with a bottle of Bundy rum. I also took out a can of iced Coke from the refrigerator. After pouring myself a double, I took up the envelope, took out my laptop, and configured it to browse the contents of the USB drive as I read the report more carefully. After reading the report, I discovered that Bridget and Brad had dated for a few months prior to Bridget and I starting our relationship. This made sense to me after I calmed down and read the article, given what I already knew about Bridget's breakup. We didn't discuss it much, and the pie verified what I already knew, that their initial separation had not been healthy. I continued reading and discovered that they had not communicated for roughly 6 months before to our marriage, and that my devoted wife had resumed her contact with her ex-partner fewer than 3 months following our honeymoon. Page after page of conversation transcripts, from their day-to-day cohabitation when they were together to their reflections on the past and future goals, were included in the pie report. Stated differently, a fully developed romantic relationship. I read through several of their chats in some detail while I sat there, feeling practically ill at my loving wife's betrayal. But what really grabbed my attention was a passage in the report that described a conversation that happened just a month ago between the two after they had left Brad's place. I connected the USB key into my laptop, found the video file that corresponded to the transcript, and pushed play. But Brad remarked in a whiny voice, "But Bridget, baby, why don't you return to me and leave that loser behind? You are in my bed nearly as much as he is. You are aware of how much more I shine in your life." Bridget chuckled. "Yes, Brad, you are larger than Tim. And that is?" he timidly questioned. "Cash and brains," Bridget stated bluntly. Brad gave a snort. "It's true, sweetie," Bridget informed her. "Being Tim's wife allows me to leverage his substantial financial resources. Tim is also intelligent. He's still climbing, his company is valuable, and he's always been going places. That's why I took advantage of the opportunity when that Shona threw him away. She had no idea how much money he would bring in." Brad snorted once more. "Then why don't you just divorce him and we can both use the money you get? You have your muscles in all the wrong places, Brad. I was forced to sign a prenuptial agreement by Tim's attorney. I get very little if I leave him before we've been married for 10 years. If I leave him, even after 10 years, I only obtain a small portion of his worth. Even worse, we must continue to exercise caution." Without showing much emotion, Bridget told Brad, "If Tim was ever to catch us, well, I walk out with nothing but the clothes on my back for the next few years." She then grinned. Brad complained once more, "But you're still sleeping with him." "That's because I'm his wife." Exasperated, Bridget told her lover. She waved around the house, saying, "Look, Brad, honey, if I don't keep up the appearance of a good wife, then all of this comes to an end." Unbeknownst to him, Tim is the owner of this property. You wouldn't want to lose a place that costs you nothing, would you? "I guess not." Once more, Bridget laughed. "Oh my poor baby, I do think of Tim fondly in a lot of ways, but he's just a tool to get what I want." Her smile went feral at that moment. The camera only captured the side of her face, but even still, it gave me the chills. Then she spoke what she wanted to say. "Tell you what, sweetheart, Tim and I have been discussing having children soon. What if I get high on the pill and you hit me, so we can pretend it's Tim's kid? Does that alleviate your discomfort? Before an accident claims the child, you can inform Tim that the child is yours and not his when he gets 18 and is eligible to receive Tim's wealth." This thrilled Brad, and a few minutes later they were sharing a bed once more. I hurried to the lavatory and puked. I watched the video of that exchange that night while reading the story and a couple others similar to it, so I didn't get much sleep that night. I tossed and turned, having dream after dream in my head about Brad and Bridget being together. I did succeed in falling asleep, but I woke up abruptly at 8:30 when I heard my phone call. I took a time to find the accept button. "Hello," I said drowsily. My wife's cheerful voice asked, "Well, hello there, big man, you sleeping in while I am away?" As I heard a giggle, I paused for a time, unsure of how to react. Should I play it down or confront her? Bridget noticed that I hesitated. "Tim, are you okay?" she inquired. I was unable to determine if the worry was genuine or a ruse. It felt to me now like an act. I chose to hide my knowledge of her. I didn't need to see her, so I forced myself to ignore my emotion, knowing that soon enough everything would come to light. Sorry, late night, I'm working on a few difficult issues at the moment, I said. I'm so sad to hear that, darling, baby. With a cheerful demeanor, my disloyal spouse stated, well, I'll be back Monday night, so you can tell me all about it and then maybe we can start working on that baby we've been talking about, effectively indicating that she was attempting to allow Brad to make love to her this weekend. I said, sure, without much zeal. Tim, I detected a questioning tone in her voice. Did she believe that I had suspicions? Are you sure you're all right? I inhaled deeply. Yes, Bridget, I didn't get a good night's sleep after your call woke me up. I'm simply a little lost. I tried to sound like the typical me when I replied. God, she hesitated. Well, okay, baby, I'll make sure to bring you back something nice from up here on the Goldie, all right? Trying to seem like a loving husband, I said. Sounds good, Bridget. Have fun, okay? I heard Bridget sigh. She must have taken it seriously. All right, my hot husband. I'll talk to you later. Love you. I responded, goodbye, and ended the call before he could say anything further. I was offended by her remark about trying for a child, and I raged for the next few hours over the idea that she is deceiving Brad into thinking she is pregnant before passing it off as mine. She told me it was time to toss away her medicines in a song and dance following her last period a few weeks ago. I was furious. I went online, blocked Bridget's access to my bank accounts, canceled our shared credit cards, and called my accountant and corporate lawyer to ask them to take her out of my insurance and will. I spent the rest of the day doing the routine things I did in the middle of treachery. To make everything work together, I sent many letters introducing Rick to my corporate team. The thought of the net closing swiftly on Bridget made me smile, albeit morbidly. Rick and Shona arrived at my house at lunchtime, carrying meals. Warm chicken, freshly baked bread, warm chips, and a small salad. Greg was led by Maddie to her room, where they played while Rick and I talked and Shona made lunch. I appreciate the email introduction, Rick said, scowling as he studied me. But I have to say you don't look like you slept well last night, bud. No, not well. I hardly slept, and when I did, the dreams. I shook my head. Rick gave a head nod. So when do you want to hit the button? Is Monday too soon? I asked, outlining my plans. Rick grinned. Rick answered, no, that's not possible. However, I'll have to leave the family with you here and spend a few hours in the office writing things up. Are you okay with shelling out a little bit more for it? Although I'm charging you at the family rate, my employer will still expect me to bill for work done on the weekends. No problem, I shrugged the comment away. I need this finished as soon as possible. I worked on the Pies report and films for several hours. I was sickened by what I read and saw last night. She is clearly planning to fool Brad this weekend in an attempt to get pregnant, then pass it off as mine before setting up an accident for me when the child reaches 18. Rick's eyes widened. Clearly, he was still missing some of the information. Shona was disturbed as well as she sat down with a platter of sandwiches. She questioned, are you sure? Yeah, she's off the pill and I watched the video where she convinced Brad that was what was going to happen. I shrugged my shoulders. Tim, don't stress over it. We'll ensure she doesn't return to this location. Rick said, I'll also draft a restraining order against both of them to be filed Monday morning. And I'll stay here with the kids and help you pack Bridget's stuff, Shona replied. I felt slightly better after eating lunch because I had some food in my stomach. So as Rick left, I went into the spare room and brought into the master bedroom a few boxes from our move 6 months ago that we still hadn't disposed of. Shona and I spent the next few hours boxing up the majority of her clothes, toiletries, and personal hygiene items. I put in a bag roughly 1/3 of her jewelry, items she owned prior to our marriage. I was keeping the remainder. While I did place some of her shoes in the crates, the majority of them remained. What I would do with them was a mystery to me. A homeless refuge, maybe. I called a lot to get everything set up as the afternoon wore on, and Rick called me 3 times regarding specifics. He seemed much darker the past 2 times, and I could tell he had begun going over the pie evidence. As the day went on, I wasn't shocked, but I was also kind of unhappy that Bridget hadn't said anything. When Rick returned in the early afternoon carrying Thai takeaway, stormy by nature, he hugged me and expressed his regret for me. I realized then that he wasn't merely the spouse of my closest buddy. He was a true friend. I gave him a sticky note containing a 6-digit code. Glancing at the post-it note, he inquired, "What's this?" "Your new code for the front gate," I replied. I reset the system, giving everyone a new code while removing Bridget. "That's great," Rick replied. We chatted for a few more minutes until he apologized, kissed Shona, and left to locate his son, leaving Shona and I to finish dinner. After a quiet dinner, they decided to spend the entire night and most of Sunday before leaving shortly after lunch. Rick and I talked through the divorce process for a good number of hours. Other gaming was just getting started, so there wasn't much to split when Shona and I broke up. But even as I rose to fame, I always made sure to provide for Shona and Maddie much above what was needed in terms of child support. However, Bridget was the victim of a deep-seated, deliberate betrayal. I had a lot more at risk this time, and I wasn't going to let Bridget have any of it. so there wasn't much that I could do for her. As we discussed things Sunday morning, Shona noticed that I was certain Bridget was about to blow a stack. I don't think she ever loved you, Tim, Shona stated as she set down the pie report. I apologize for not speaking up earlier. To be completely honest, Bridget never really clicked with me, but I was at a loss for words. Although I may be your closest buddy, given our past. I gave a nod. Shona looked me in the eyes and whispered softly, I hoped you would be fine. I know you loved her and let her have her way, but you did let her lead you to anything she wanted. I let out a defensive, I am not submissive, out loud. No, you're not, and that's not what I meant, Shona chuckled. You don't mind being guided to the next step by others, is what I mean. You just go your own way if you don't want to do something, I've found. Bridget has made an effort to use bonding to her advantage. The house of cards would have collapsed sooner or later, and I'm relieved it happened before I became pregnant. We chatted for a little while more, and then Maddie returned a few minutes later, waddling with Greg and raising his hands over his head while he grinned like a toddler who had everyone's attention. After 15 minutes of our entertainment, Rick went into the lounge and got the kids settled in with a movie. Shona said, Maddie has picked up on it the entire time, as they left the room. No one messes with her dad, and she has never really liked Bridget. That's something I can confirm to you. I jokingly added, except her mum, which earned me a hit to the arm. Tim, Shona remarked, abruptly altering the mood in the room. My ex-wife had a dejected expression on her face when I looked at her. With a sigh, I know we have spoken about it before, but I am sorry it didn't work between us, Shona stated to me. But just because it didn't, I hope you know it doesn't mean I love you any less. I bowed my head, finding it difficult to swallow at the moment. Shona went on. You are my best friend Timothy Other. We created a beautiful little girl together. We went through hell and almost lost each other, but you showed me true character by not burning me when you had a chance. She interrupted me as I was about to continue, but Shona, I did. No, Tim, you didn't, she informed me. Yes, we screamed and yelled at one another. I did something for which I am deeply sorry, and yes, throughout our divorce I did refer to you by many derogatory names. But you never gave me bad treatment. I have never once been led to believe that you are anything other than a man of honor by you. Rick returned inside and took a seat next to Shona. He nodded as he heard the conclusion of her speech and wrapped his arm around his wife. Rick sat, a little lost in contemplation. Shona has told me a lot of what you two went through back then. You are one of the few persons in this world, Tim, that I can count on one hand as a lawyer. After our short argument, Shona urged me to take my head out of my ass. I had a very different perspective on you. My girl was not going to be stolen by you. All you wanted was to raise your daughter and be with her closest friend. I realized something had changed for me when I saw that. You were a man of integrity and honesty who only desired to carry out the correct deed. Rick eyed me. Tim, I heard your comment earlier. You are in no way a submissive. I've watched you battle with Shona about stuff I wouldn't dare fight her on. Shona smiled at her husband's comment, and then nodded to me. I've heard stories of you tearing your personnel a new one because they did something you instructed them not to do. You are an alpha dog, but the distinction is that you play by your rules, not everyone else's. Most alphas are ruled by scared of missing out, but you're not. Make your point, babe, Shona remarked. You're in lawyer mode. Rick and I chuckled. My point, Rick continued glancing at Shona, is that Tim, you're about to go through a whole lot of garbage getting rid of Bridget, but you need to realize it's nothing you have done. You have been an attentive husband and she is the one that has taken advantage of it. It's going to be her loss, not yours. We wound down a little after that and Shona offered to let Maddie stay with me this week to keep me company. After a time though, I answered no if things went messy with Bridget. I didn't want Maddie in the firing line. Monday morning I headed into the office to work with a few of my managers on a few different projects. We were working on the release of a new game within the following 6 months, one that combined augmented reality across various platforms. It was going to be great if my personal life didn't get in the way. I returned home in the early afternoon and began nervously pacing, waiting for the confrontation to begin. A little after 4 in the afternoon, my phone rang. Tim, baby, my code isn't working for the gate, Bridget stated in a wonderfully lovely voice. I can't get into the house. I know, I responded simply and honestly. What do you mean you know? With a hint of worry in her voice, she spoke. I inhaled deeply. Bridget, everything is known to me. I am aware of Brad, your scheme to fake a pregnancy and claim it as your own, and the accident you have planned. I am aware that on Tuesdays and Thursdays you are not at work. I am aware that you are renting an apartment from Brad, which you forced me to pay for. Above all, I am aware of your disdain for me and your lack of affection for me. She took in what I was saying and said nothing. I didn't hold up on responding to her. I took away your access to my residence, so I know your code doesn't work. Bridget, you're not living here anymore, I said. But how are you able to say that, Tim? Yes, sweetie, I do love you. Despite the sickly sweetness of Bridget's remarks, there was a hint of apprehension. Don't forget it was me that picked you up when that Shona dumped you. It was me that took you to bed and has loved you this past 4 years. How can you say such nasty things to me? I spat down the phone at her and said, easily, revealing for the first time how angry I was at her deception. I stood there staring out the window, seeing her by herself by the gate. That's when I saw the cars arrive. "Turn around, Bridget." I heard her gasp as she turned around. The two brief exchanges sounded to me like echo off the phone in Bridget's hand. "Mrs. Bridget Other?" inquired the man. "Yes," Bridget answered, trembling. The man pronounced, "You've been served. It didn't really have to be this way in Australia, but I wanted to make a statement." The man went on. "The divorce petition, your husband's prenuptial agreement, and a notice to depart your husband's residence with yourself and Mr. Brad Houghton within 10 days are all enclosed in the envelope. My client warns you that if he resists, you will be sued for mental cruelty and any money he would have been ready to offer outside of the prenup will be taken. The final document is a drawn-out restraining order that is effective tonight evening." After saying so, he turned around, got back in his vehicle, and left. I paid Rick the amount I felt he was worth. The second person Bridget spoke to was an old lady getting out of a car. Her mother, Marion. "Mum, Tim," she began, but her mother's smack reverberated across the phone line, so she stopped talking. Marion yelled, "Whore, I've seen enough of what you've done to that poor man. Never in my life have I been so disappointed in someone." "Mum, that's not true. I don't know what Tim told you," Bridget said, clutching her cheek. I briefly believed that the elder woman would slap her daughter once more. However, after turning around, my mother-in-law went back to her car and opened the door. "Drop it, Bridget," Marion said to her mother. "I am aware of the facts. Tim showed me one of his pictures. Tim has asked that your father and I take you in because you have nowhere else to go. It's unbelievable that you've reconnected with that Brad person. He is a complete loser in comparison to Tim," her mother snarled. I continued to listen on the open line. "Tim kindly arranged for the relocation of all of your possessions to our home. Burning them would have been my choice." Enter. Ignoring her daughter's complaints, Bridget's mother came to a conclusion. Bridget put the phone back to her ear as soon as she noticed our call was still active. My soon-to-be ex-wife asked hesitantly, "Tim?" "Bridget," I stated without feeling. With a hint of hope mixed with despair, she asked, "There's no fixing this, is there?" I chuckled a little too much. "Not a possibility in the world. You'll be fine if you follow the guidelines in the divorce brief. Beyond the prenup, I'm prepared to be fair, but if you play around with me even a little, you will lose everything, including your respect." I hesitated, and for a brief while, neither of us spoke. "I did love you, Bridget," I leaned in to say. "But you're a gold digger, you didn't love me, so you threw that love away." "Oh, and Bridget," I said, getting ready to fire one last shot across the bow. She was holding her breath, even though I couldn't hear anything. "Obtain a test for pregnancy. We both know that if you are pregnant, it is not mine. If you continue to argue with me about paternity, I will thoroughly disgrace you to the point where your grandchildren will still feel unclean," I concluded angrily. As I hung up, I heard her cry. Yes, I felt better, empty as it may have been. The following month was kind of an emotional roller coaster. To distract myself, I would either lose myself in my work or take Maddie on trips. However, I had awful dreams as I slept, and I frequently woke up cursing like a sailor. Bridget was in communication with Rick after hiring an attorney. Rick assumed they would contest the prenuptial agreement and insist on a customary 50-50 division. But as of yet, nothing had occurred. I gave Rick permission to offer a settlement of $30,000, but they haven't responded as of yet. That weekend, however, was different. I had taken Maddie to the beach, and we were sitting on the pavement outside one of those tiny fish and chip stores from the 1980s, sharing an ice cream cone. These buildings, which are made of beige brick and have a tin roof, are probably ones you have seen on television. As soon as you come through the door, you can smell the chip oil on the lino floors. There are sets of plastic tables and chairs out front, and everyone is moving around in board shorts or bikinis with a surfboard tucked under their arm or towels draped over their shoulders. It's a laid-back vibe. I went swimming with Maddie, and we were both in love with the waves. After swimming and getting cleaned up in the freshwater outdoor shower, the father and daughter enjoyed an ice cream while sitting on the pale blue and yellow plastic chairs. The temperature was chilly as winter was ending, but one thing about Byron is that the water is pleasant even in somewhat colder weather if the sun is out. While Maddie and I were having fun and discussing how to catch a wave that was about to peak, all of a sudden, a big arm was wrapped around my neck and I was dragged off my chair and back again while Maddie began to scream. A few moments later, I was thrown to the ground, gasping for air, barely avoiding the kick that took my breath away once more. "Damn dweeb, throw me out of my place, I'll show you." I looked up to see Brad Houghton towering over me, and I could feel the repulsive sensation of spit on my face. I looked at Maddie's terrified face while I was being attacked. Luckily, he withdrew a bit later, provoking me to stand up. "Common dweeb, you couldn't satisfy Bridget and obviously couldn't screw your first wife for crap," he said while I was standing. He gave Maddie a quick glance before grinning sickly. "I bet this one isn't even yours, loser." With a snarl on his face, he then began to move toward me, saying, "You got me kicked out of my house, you just couldn't maintain the status quo. I was ready to put up with Bridget fooling you like this. Towing the dang line was all that was required." I attempted to block his strike, but because I had never sparred before, I took it on my left shoulder, which caused me to spin around and fall into a garden bed. My head struck a palm tree that was sticking out of the ground, and I felt the skin on my forehead peel off. Brad took a step toward me, but my daughter raced in front of him, screaming at the top of her lungs, before he could get to me. Give my dad some space. Get away from him, he hasn't done you any harm. She exhaled deeply and cried out, help. In a flash of wrath, Brad seized Maddie mid-sentence and threw her away from him like a rag doll. I was struggling to get up after hitting the palm tree with such force. I saw Brad swing and throw my kid away in an attempt to reach me, even though blood was starting to pool over my left eye. Everything in my universe slowed down as he let her go. My comment: what do you think about this time? Learn to be more of a fighter, and you can become a better lover. The more you face, the less stressed you become. Final ending coming later. Subscribe if you enjoyed this, and I will see you in the ending.